Hey everybody, before we get into this week's episode of the C-Town podcast, I just want to give you a brief update as to why we took several months off. One, summer, family vacations, pretty busy season in real estate, pretty overwhelmed, starting new brokerage, just changed locations, so we spent a bunch of money outfitting a new space. It's much larger, room to grow. Brought on board several new agents, went to a big conference in San Francisco, so the podcast has kind of fallen by the wayside, but I want to apologize for that. Any of you regular listeners who were waiting for the next episode to drop, here it is. Welcome back to this week's episode of the C-Town podcast, where Seattle business owners, entrepreneurs, and community leaders are invited on to share their stories with us. I'm your host, Christian Harris. As the owner of an indie real estate brokerage here in Seattle, I'm naturally interested in various communities around Seattle and what makes each of them so unique and distinct. And local businesses and organizations play a large part in shaping the flavor and character of the neighborhoods that we love so much. So join me as we talk with these fascinating people and explore their stories of why they started their businesses, run their nonprofits, or otherwise are making an impact in the Seattle area. Today I'm joined by Clay Eals, the Executive Director of Southwest Seattle Historical Society. From my understanding, you've been involved with it since it's been founded in 1984, and then in 2013 you became the first Executive Director for the organization.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you do as the Executive Director for them?
Well, one word is everything.
Okay. Yep.
I don't literally do everything, but I'm responsible. And the idea of the job is to really focus on three areas, which is fundraising, outreach, and volunteer recruitment.
Okay.
In addition to the overall management of the organization.
Sure.
The position didn't exist before 2013, and we had a consultant through a grant project tell us in 2011 that if we did not create such a position, our organization would likely die.
Sure.
And I was on the board at the time. I jumped off the board because I didn't want to be a part of creating a job that I might apply for. Mm-hmm. And so they created the job and advertised for it, interviewed for it,
sure.
And they had the foolishness to offer me the job. And so I've been doing it since January of 2013.
Sure. Well, it seems like only good things have come since you've taken that, which makes sense. And I'd imagine the impact of an organization can only go so far strictly based on non-paid volunteer.
Right, and to have somebody really focused on getting the organization out into the minds and hearts of the community sure. is a really important task. We have a museum down on Alki Beach, the birthplace of Seattle Log House Museum, and there could be a tendency for people to say, oh, you're just about the museum, you're just about Alki.
Sure.
But our service area is really the entire Duwamish Peninsula, mm-hmm. West Seattle, White Center, South Park, the whole peninsula bounded by the Duwamish River and Puget Sound and Elliott Bay.
Sure.
And so part of my outreach focus has been to get us out into the community in a lot of different ways, so that we still promote the fact that we have a museum and all of the programs, the great collection activity and the exhibits and so forth that we have at the museum, but also to get us out into the community where people live and shop and work.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, speaking of, kind of the area of responsibility and, getting kind of outreach to the community and mm-hmm. Exposure, I mean, how would you describe what Southwest Seattle Historic Society is all about? What's their main objective?
Well, every nonprofit has a mission statement. Ours is really short and easy to remember. We promote local history through three ways: through education, preservation, and advocacy. And so those three words are sitting on my shoulder all the time: education, sure. preservation, and advocacy. And often the things that we do kind of cover all three bases at once. That's when you hit a home run there. And these are the kinds of things that really touch people who live here in this area. I mean, this is a special area. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I use this phrase, West Seattle is the best Seattle. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I mean, everybody is attached to his or her own hometown or where they live for one reason or another. But this place is truly special. The geography, the history, all of the things that came before to make it the attractive place that it is today.
Sure. Now, maybe you could give us a little backstory about yourself and like how you got involved and why you decided to take on the role of the ED.
Well, you know, before I even knew it, history was in my veins. West Seattle history.
Okay.
We're sitting in an office here that's right across from Hiawatha Park,
Right.
and 3 short blocks away is where my mom grew up. And
Okay.
I have to whisper this around here in West Seattle, but I grew up on Mercer Island. And people think of Mercer Island as this place with all these mansions and stuff, but
Sure.
but when I was a
different back
kid in
then,
the
yeah.
50s, it was a bunch of 3-bedroom ramblers. And,
Sure.
and my parents moved us there when I was 4 years old. But my mom's home was here in West Seattle, right across from the wading pool here at Hiawatha Park. And we came over to visit my grandparents all the time, and there was nothing my grandmother wanted to do more than to take us down to Spud Fish and Chips and have us run around in the beach. And
Yeah.
then pretty soon you get Schmitz Park, and you get Husky Deli, and then you get Lincoln Park, and you're in, man. I mean, this is feels like home.
Sure.
You know, when you're an adult, you decide to take on to lay down roots, and this is where I wanted to come. And I was down in Oregon for a dozen years. I went to school there and worked for the Oregonian for 8 years. And,
Okay.
but I really wanted to get back up here. And so in '82, we moved here. And I was a newspaper journalist. I worked for 4 papers for 15 years. And as a journalist, you're sitting on the side taking notes. You're not in the action. But I became editor of the West Seattle Herald here. This is before the internet, of course.
Right. Yeah.
And this was a strong paper, you know, a broadsheet paper. I had a news staff of 5, and we did some great journalism then. And right then, the West Seattle Bridge was under construction and opened in 1984. We did a historical section, 104-page section called Bridging the Gap. And then not long after that, we devoted a whole year to putting together a history book of West Seattle called West Side Story, which came out in July of 2000, or excuse me, it came out in July of 1987.
Okay.
This is the 30th anniversary is coming up here in July. So that history book is what really changed me from this objective journalist to an activist on behalf of history. I mean, once you immerse yourself in the history of this peninsula, there's no going back.
Sure.
And so that's why the Historical Society for me. And then I've been in communication all my life, and I've been in positions where I've worked very close to fundraisers as well. And so this position of fundraising, outreach, and volunteer recruitment really just seemed to fit me like a glove. And plus my background in West Seattle. I mean, the overarching thing is you gotta love it.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, you gotta love it. But to do the Historical Society, you really have to love the area. And it's not a stretch to say that anybody, you or anybody who is attached to West Seattle, the reason we're here is not because of us, it's because of what people who came before us built for us.
Yeah.
I like to say we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
So once you know that kind of stuff by going to events or the exhibits or whatever, it becomes food for your soul. So that's why me and the Historical Society, and you got to love it, and I do.
Sure.
I do.
Sure. Well, I mean, it sounds like with your background, your passion, like that role, you know, is really ideal for you. I mean, what would you say that you love most about being involved, being the executive director of the Historical Society?
Well, it all comes down to, and it isn't even about the Historical Society, it's any pursuit, I think. But let's just take the Historical Society. You may think, oh, it's about the stuff, you know, the artifacts, or it's about saving buildings, or whatever. Anything you name, if you go to a little deeper level, I think it's really about bringing people together for common purpose.
Okay.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
You know, and the stuff is the excuse for getting us together. So what I enjoy the most is the contact with people. To me, that's the juice of life. You know, I don't care what you believe about religion or you know, the deeper thoughts about why are we here. But I would guess that it doesn't matter what you believe, you would agree that we're not supposed to be hermits. We're supposed to engage people. We're supposed to inspire people, connect with people. In fact, that's what we're doing in this podcast right now. You know, so this is the job that I've had in the Historical Society is really about getting people together.
Sure.
And it's about taking risks. Life is nothing without a risk. And I'm taking a risk right now. You know, when I say something to you, you may not like it. So maybe I shouldn't say anything, right? I mean, it's the kind of, you know, and it drives me nuts that we're teaching little kids that life is all about pushing buttons on a piece of plastic.
Sure.
That's one-way communication. The real juice of life, the risk, and the tremendous reward is in taking the risk of communicating with others.
Yeah.
The best way to do that is face-to-face.
Yeah, I mean, face-to-face is obviously the deepest and purest form of communication. Everything else is a lesser, you know,
Absolutely.
Mediated, you know, type, you know, that's trying to replace, you know. I mean, with, you know, kind of the mission of the Historic Society, you know, more or less being to connect people to, you know, attach us to the history and have us understand, you know, kind of why West Seattle is the way it is now and why it looks the way it does and why we love it so much. What would you say are some of the more notable accomplishments or involvements that the Historic Society has been involved with?
We just finished a major landmark campaign in the West Seattle Junction. And if you ask anybody who's familiar with the Junction, which is our prime business district on the peninsula, what are the two buildings without which there wouldn't be a junction anymore? It would almost unanimously people would say the Campbell Building and the Ham Building. Those are the two cornerstones of the Junction. The Campbell Building, the main tenant is Cupcake Royale, built in 1911, and the Ham Building, the main tenant is Easy Street Records, built in 1926. We just this winter and spring successfully pursued a campaign to get city landmark status for those buildings. And it was a huge effort. Our We Love the Junction task force did a great job, and those buildings will be there forever for our kids and grandkids and for the generations we'll never see.
Sure, which is especially important when you're looking at the changing face of West Seattle with all the new, relatively, high-rise, modern buildings and stuff.
It's funny you use the phrase "the changing face of West Seattle." That's the name of the series that we did in the Herald for 4 weeks when the West Seattle Bridge opened.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
In 1984.
30 years
and we had an editorial cartoon showing the bridge open and all these trucks, pickup trucks with condos in the back of the pickup truck roaring over the bridge.
Yeah, I guess it goes in waves, right?
Yeah. I want to be really clear though about landmarking. It's important to really get inside your head that we're not about saving everything. You can't save everything for once, and you really don't want to save everything. The real trick is to save the good stuff.
Sure.
And so the real juice of that is, what is the good stuff?
Right, yeah.
And how do you figure that out?
Right.
And with the Junction, we had a professional architectural historian, and we did a study that went for 2 years, and we involved the public, including interviewing the property owners. And this isn't just a wave your fingers and something's a landmark. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of head work to figure out what are the true landmarks of the community that really define us.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, recently, just the other day, actually, I read on the West Seattle blog that you're actually going to be stepping down as the executive director in July. Could you give us a little more information about, maybe what's next for you? What do you have in store?
I am in a blissful state of I don't know.
Okay.
But it's important to realize that this has been a continuum for me. Even though I've been doing the executive director job for more than 4 years, I've really been involved with the organization for more than 3 decades. And I'm not going anywhere. I'll be involved after this as well. I mean, this is just the kind of an issue or a topic that all of us face at sometime or another in our lives, of when to move on to the next chapter.
Sure.
And I feel like we have really built a lot. Our our mission and our track record of accomplishment, and we've got a strong board. These things really bode well for the future. And I feel very confident that some successor candidates will pop up, people who are connected to West Seattle who love it and have the kind of skills to promote the mission of our organization. And so I don't have any trepidation that we will do anything but grow as an organization.
Yeah.
As far as what I'm going to do, number one, I want to spend some more time with my wife. I have, this is probably something that a lot of people can relate to. I mean, in America, we let our jobs become our life, and it's been the story of my life. No matter whether I've worked at the Hutch or at the Herald or at the Historical Society or several other positions, it's just I've thrown myself into the work, and I would like to spend more time not only on family stuff, but improving my health. Physical health doesn't often come at the forefront of a job that you throw yourself into.
Sure.
Some part-time things, I don't even know. Opportunities will come to me, I'm sure. And people have been throwing this word retirement at me. And, maybe technically I'll be retired because the technical definition is that's when you take Social Security, and I'm anticipating doing that this summer, starting that. But also the general societal definition of retirement is you're done.
Right.
And I ain't done.
Yeah, which seems very sad to me. I mean, I think the best definition of retirement that I've heard was you get to a place in life where you don't have to work. Do you plan on staying on the board after you step down?
I don't anticipate. Let's see. I don't know what role I'll be with the Historical Society. We have our biggest fundraiser of the year is the gala every November.
Yep.
I'm sure I'll have a table there.
Okay.
As far as on the board or other things, I think it's going to be healthy. If you imagine in any job where the successor comes in, you don't want to have the predecessor trying to rule from the grave and
Sure.
sitting on the shoulder and
Makes
shadowing
sense.
you.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be some distance for a while, and exactly what role I'll have afterward, I don't know. But West Seattle gets under your skin, and I'm not. One way or another, I'll be helping out, and
Sure.
and there's just a lot of. There's a lot of history yet to be written. I mean, one thing people have told me every once in a while is, well, gee, West Side Story is a great book, but it came out 30 years ago. When are you going to update it? Well, it'll take a little time.
Sure, yeah.
But it is primed for an update and a different kind of model because, to make it live into the future, it may need to be an online type of thing rather than a physical book. But I think there's some possibility for not only me, but other people to be involved in doing something in the future on behalf of history here.
Sure, that totally makes sense. So, in your role as the first executive director for the society, where do you find the most challenging aspect of that?
Well, the challenging aspect is the same challenge of any job, and that is taking initiative. And, inertia is a powerful force. We're sitting here in chairs. We could just sit here. It's so comfortable. Just sit and sit and sit.
Sure.
And the best advice I ever had about fundraising is that fundraising comes down to 4 words. It's very easy. Pick up the phone. Pick up the phone. A real estate salesman can get into that. Pick up the phone is an analogy for take the initiative and set up meetings with people. Go have coffee, go have lunch.
Sure.
Just magic happens when you just engage in conversation with people. And the worst thing that anybody being executive director of our organization could do is to just hole up at the museum. And there's a lot of administrivia that can keep you doing that. And if I'm doing my job, and if any future executive director is doing his or her job, they're not at the museum. They're out in the community meeting and talking with people.
Sure.
And just asking them,
Right.
why do they love it here? And getting to know them.
Right, they're connecting with the community, yeah.
And the best kind of fundraising really happens when you get to that point in the conversation where they ask you, so how can I help you? And that happens all the time.
Sure.
The challenge is to get up out of the chair and go meet people.
Yeah. So you kind of allude to, at least, in regard to fundraising, but what's the best advice that you say you've ever received?
About anything?
Yeah.
There was a former pastor who told me about 20 years or so ago, and it's a very simple phrase. He said, life is anticipation. And that doesn't mean that you don't live in the present moment. Mm-hmm. Of course you live in the present moment and you relish it and you embrace it. But I think what he meant by that is that it's good to have something that you're working on, something that you're looking forward to,
sure.
Something. Some of your listeners may remember a departed West Seattle giant named Bob Grieve, who served in the state legislature and the county council and was an attorney here, and he was a legend here in the 20th century. He said the way he looked at it is, I've always got to have a mountain, a mountain to climb. Mm-hmm. So life is anticipation. That really motivates me. I mean, I've always got in my head these projects that could be done,
Sure.
And the idea is, which one? So what are you anticipating doing? And then when you throw yourself into it with passion, if it's something you really love, you will gather people to you.
Sure.
Because passion is tremendously inspiring to people.
Sure.
One of my wife and I's favorite movies is Jerry Maguire, and Renee Zellweger's character in there says at one point, I just want to be inspired.
Sure.
Well, what are you inspired about? Well, life is anticipation. There's a project you can work on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Historic Society is obviously about, essentially the larger, culture of West Seattle and, the history that's led it there. When you break down what culture is, it's humans cultivating the potential of an area or whatever, and that's, and you can't do that without, having this forward-thinking anticipation, hope, like what are we building, what are we going for, what inspires us to keep going.
It's true. If you ask somebody not familiar with heritage organizations or historical societies, well, what do? They might be thinking, oh, that's just dust and spider webs. They collect old stuff. They just, and it's, nothing dynamic. But what it really is forward-looking. One of the things that has inspired me the most is our founder, Elliot Cowden, who's been gone now for a dozen years, but he had our board pass a resolution 12 years ago that stated that the needs and interests of young people are our highest priority. And so I keep that in my mind and on my shoulder as
Sure.
I'm moving along, and that means the future. That is, what are we doing with the kids? I mean, as adults, to a greater or lesser degree, we all appreciate and understand why heritage is important, but we got to get the kids involved and reach their hearts. One way that we've tried to do that, and it's been pretty inspiring, is to do these group hug photo events. We've now done it for 3 years in a row, and we're doing 2 more in the next couple of months. The first one was when our totem pole was unveiled at our museum in 2014, and we had 1,300 people in the street to witness the unveiling, and there were 900 elementary kids who walked to that. The next year we did the same thing at the Alki homestead, and the reason we call it a group hug is that the resulting photo taken from a high angle on top of a lift truck, it looks like the people are actually hugging the building.
Okay.
And we had 1,000 students in front of the homestead and another 100 chaperones and adults. And then last year, just a block down the street, we had the group hug for the Admiral Theater to celebrate that historic building's rejuvenation, because now it's got 4 screens without harming any of the historic features that we got landmarked 28 years ago.
Sure.
And that's kids.
Yeah.
The 2 that are coming up are about schools, so it's people of any age. The Fauntleroy Schoolhouse and West Seattle High School are celebrating their centennials this year. Those buildings have been around 100 years. So we're doing a group hug in front of the Fauntleroy Schoolhouse on May 21st at 11:30, and West Seattle High School on June 3rd at 6:30 to coincide with the all-school reunion that they have every year. And it's an event that's geared around, this kind of an event is all about the photo. Because people want to be in something that's making history, and then we make these large posters of the photo, and at street fairs and at the museum and other events, literally kids come running up to the photo with their fingers out, and they look and they look and they say, "That's me."
Yeah.
And they do that the next year and the next year, and just imagine, that's going to be in their hearts for the rest of their lives. I was there.
Sure.
I was part of history. And you bet that'll connect them to West Seattle.
Yeah, that's cool that the founder had that resolution that was looking forward, trying to change kind of the reputation, get the newer generation involved in the value of history, and
Visionary guy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, make a little shift here, and maybe some recommendations, some things that you like. Do you listen to podcasts or books on, well, if not on tape anymore, but audiobooks?
I have to say no.
Okay.
What I do every day, the first thing every morning is I read the Seattle Times. And it's not because I'm in love with the print. What I'm in love with is the core concept of journalism being a combination of what you want to read and what you ought to read.
Sure.
And the only way to do that is with a paper that puts all of that together. And you may be going to look at the comics or something you're looking forward to, but driving by, you say, "Oh, gee, I didn't know that. I ought to know about that." Whereas with the internet, we're smarter than we ever were. Well, let me back up.
Got more
With the
information
internet, we have more information than we
Sure.
ever do, but we're dumber than we ever have been because
Sure.
people go to their niches.
Right.
And they don't do the stuff that they ought to do. And so, I know there's a lot of great podcasts and listening to audiobooks. Up until just recently, we had a car for 20 years. For the last 15 years, it didn't even have a radio in it because it broke, and I didn't want to spend the money to repair. Yeah. So even in the car, I haven't been listening to the radio up until just now.
Sure. I think that's a interesting perspective on the newspaper. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms because I have observed obviously online. It's unless you really go out of your way, you're pretty much only consuming stuff that agrees with your worldview.
Absolutely.
And so we get more and more, isolated, more and more,
I don't
divided,
think,
but the newspaper, that's
I don't think it's an
interesting,
accident we're more polarized than ever because
for
of
sure,
that.
But
And so it doesn't have to be physical paper, but I have yet to come up or to see something that does the same kind of thing that brings us.
Sure.
When I was young, people would revolt against the mainstream, right? And there were good reasons for that. But there's also good reasons for a mainstream, for there to be something that all of us in society are informed about and aware about, rather than being in these niches. Because I think by being informed about the things that we ought to be informed about, we make better decisions.
Sure.
And we're able to converse with each other more instead of sticking in our silos.
Right. Well, I appreciate the perspective that the print paper brings. You're going to come across stuff that may be of interest, or maybe it's not, but you're like, I should know this, or this is a different perspective than what I would normally consume.
And that was what was pounded into my brain back in journalism school from '69 to '74.
Sure.
And it took me almost 6 years to get through school because I kept cutting class to go write for the school paper.
Sure. Well, I got I guess a question for you on that, since you do have a journalism background. You kind of hear about the good old days of journalism when the goal was to be non-objective, to be objective. It seems like nowadays everything's just partisan, and like the big critique isn't so much that what different avenues, different stations that they're biased, so to speak, but that they don't acknowledge their bias as if they're objective. Does it seem like the old days of unbiased journalism is gone, or do you still see elements of people actually trying to present news without a spin?
media organizations that I admire the most are the ones that have been around the longest and have been steeped in the traditions of journalistic ethics and the sort of the three-legged stool of fair, complete, and accurate. I mean, these things are part of long-standing journalistic tradition, and you're right that we don't see a lot of that anymore. It's like, to heck, you know, don't confuse me with facts. You know,
Sure.
we've got I forget the phrase, but we've got an axe to grind. That's what I was looking for.
Sure.
And it's important. I mean, and you say the good old days of journalism. There were bad journalists and there were sensational journalists and all of that.
Sure.
Please, let's acknowledge that. But the core of journalism as a profession, it's not called the fourth estate for nothing. In other words, there's the three branches of the federal government, and the fourth estate is there to keep watch on them all.
Sure.
And to afflict the comforted and to comfort the afflicted. I mean, it's, you know, people, oh, for all my life I've heard, you know, oh, it's just, journalism is just so much bad news. But I really think of bad news as good news in disguise, because it's really showing things that are not going so well and maybe motivating people to be informed enough to change it so that we can improve things. That's the whole core of journalism, is that if we know more, we'll make better decisions.
Sure.
And there are
Hopefully.
still journalism schools teaching that.
Okay.
And there are still media, you know, I mean, the Seattle Times does a great job of trying to do that. We used to have two papers. I loved that. We had the Seattle Post-Intelligencer.
Right.
But because of the forces at work to make money with this online stuff, and I mean, newspapers are a dying breed, unfortunately. But there's still, even with their reduced staffs, they're doing their best to serve that journalistic tradition. On a national level, you know, you've got the New York Times, the Washington Post, you've got these truly long-standing traditional places that are, I mean, you saw the movie Spotlight, I'm sure. A couple of years ago, it won Best Picture.
Okay.
And it was all about the New York Times newsroom, you know, and the idea is that, you know, you're not going to make a lot of money doing great journalism. You really aren't. It's not about being on TV and being pretty and doing a 30-second story. To do really in-depth quality journalism, you got to love it, because that's your true payment.
Sure.
And journalists are definitely there to change the world, in the sense that they are there to bring all information to light. In fact, bend over backwards from what you personally believe to bring out everything from all sides, so that the public can have the best information to use to make decisions.
Sure.
I'll believe in that forever.
Okay.
And the more that society can embrace that, the better. How exactly that's going to happen in this online world, I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
Have you seen, or I don't know if you've kept track or whatever? I mean, from I think the traditional seems like the traditional approach has been go to journalism school and get a job at a well-established organization or paper, magazine or something. With the proliferation of internet and self-publications and whatnot, it seems like there's a lot more people just kind of doing it, maybe as a hobby or some sort of alternative fashion. I mean, does it seem like the actual journalism school and going that traditional route is on the decline?
I'm sure it is. I haven't put a study to it, but I'm sure that it is. It's you talked about the word culture earlier, and it's a part of our culture now to do your own thing, and the technology has allowed us to produce publications or to be online.
Sure. Do a podcast.
Do a podcast, as if you had a lot of training to do it.
Sure, I've got no
But now sort of
background.
anybody can do it.
Sure.
And it's similar in the world of book publishing. The traditions of book publishing are changing by the day.
Sure, there's no gatekeeper of, you have to have a publisher in order to get your book, out there.
Right, and there's a downside to being self-published, and is that you don't have the credibility of a publisher.
Sure.
that gets you in the door, that gets you on radio stations for interviews, but podcasts may be the way. I mean, it's this foggy future of
Sure.
communication that I don't think anybody can really see. I'm sure that there are people who want to make big money on it, who have got a vision for how this should work, but their goal is to make money. Their goal is not to serve journalistic tradition. Now, newspapers, of course they made money, and of course they had wretched excess, and of course they made mistakes and whatever. But the core of it was there. What I said earlier, you're not going to get rich being a journalist. If you're a good journalist, is true. It's true. You're going to make the most money going into the corporate world in some way or the other. And communication has become the corporate world. Why these days are we talking about fake news? It shouldn't even be out there, but it's like the
just easy way to discredit, somebody you don't agree with. But
well, there is that, but it's also there are people
clickbait
intentionally
culture,
out
sure.
there, little trolls, if you will,
Sure.
sitting in a dark room in the middle of the night, putting out misinformation.
sure. Intentionally making up stuff. Yeah.
And we didn't have a lot of that in earlier days, but it.
Yeah,
It's a really hard and complex nut to solve and
Sure.
to predict.
Sure. There's clearly pros and cons of the changing face of journalism. And
I think one thing you can do though is walk your talk. I mean, subscribe to a newspaper, have it delivered at your doorstep. If you really believe in quality journalism, then don't just criticize it from afar, but put some of your own money into paying for it.
Sure.
That's one of the kind of bizarre things of the internet, is that most everything on the internet is free, and we've got a culture who thinks that that's the way news ought to be, like it just materializes by itself.
Sure.
But to get good journalists to reveal the information that we ought to know and get it from people who don't want to tell it to you, who have an interest in secrecy, all of that stuff, it takes some money.
Sure.
Somebody's got to do that, and yet we've got a whole generation of people who think that it just comes free, and geez, look at all this stuff on the internet, I'm informed. We are not informed. We need to invest as a society in the values that journalism provides and uphold the fourth estate.
Okay. So speaking of journalism and the print medium, do you have a favorite book that you'd recommend to our listeners?
If you want to get inspired about something, I think the ultimate best job out there, and I bow down to anybody, is somebody who's a teacher. And the book that has inspired me the most about the teaching profession is the first book by the famous author Pat Conroy. It's called The Water is Wide.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And it was made into a movie called Conrack, and John Voight was the star of it in 1974. Water is Wide came out, I believe, in 1969. And it's an account of his 1 year as a teacher in a rural, all-black island off of the Carolinas. And I mean, that story will just grab you, and it's not fiction. He's known for his fiction, but this is a memoir that was written right after that year. So there's a lot of great books, but I'd throw that one out there.
Okay. And then as we wrap up, what was one piece of parting guidance you'd like to leave with us? You've given us so much already, but...
Have no fear.
Okay.
Assume that when you take the risk to communicate with somebody, that something good will come out of it. It won't always happen every time, but take the risk. Say hello to somebody out on the street. Pick up the phone. Don't just hide out in our homes watching whatever. Life is about engagement.
Yeah.
So in order to make that happen, you've got to assume that good things will come out of this kind of outreach. So shed your fear.
Okay.
You know, so much in life that holds us back can be reduced to that one word of fear. So take the risk to engage other people.
Okay. And what is the best way for listeners to find out more about the Southwest Seattle Historic Society?
I'm railing about the internet, and I'm going to give you a website. But our website is loghousemuseum.info. If you want a landline phone number, it's 206-938-5293. One great thing is that you can sign up on our website for our email blasts that go out every week or two with all kinds of information about the activities we're doing. If you become a member, you also get a print newsletter. Memberships start at $25 a year for an individual, $15 for a senior, and then they go on up into the higher categories. And so you can get a print newsletter, but things are happening so fast that often email is the best way to get that information.
Sure.
And then the local media. I got to stick up for the local media. The West Seattle Herald is still going under the moniker of West Side Seattle. And then there's the West Seattle blog, which is a truly phenomenal, it's been around for 10 years. The couple, Tracy Record and Patrick Sand, who do it, I don't know when they sleep, but they have created something that's not only serving our community, but is truly special in the nation. People in West Seattle get spoiled, and they think that, every neighborhood or every community or city has one of these. Nuh-uh.
Right.
And Tracy and Patrick come from the traditional world of journalism, and they have high ethics, and their work ethic is strong as well. And we are fortunate that people can find out about our activities through the blog and through the Herald.
Yeah. I mean, if you're local West Seattle, everyone knows West Seattle blogs where you go for the most, current, what's going on. So it's as of right now, that episode isn't published, but I interviewed Tracy for the podcast too, and looking forward to getting that out to the community. So thank you, Clay, for your time. I appreciate it. It's interesting to hear more about your background and about the society, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity. And what you're doing is a good contribution to everything we've been talking about. I mean, if we get people talking about West Seattle, what could be better?
Yeah, trying to do my part. So, all right, thanks again.
That wraps up this week's episode. Make sure to check out our guest website, pay them a visit, and otherwise support what they're doing. If you have questions, know someone who should be a guest here, or has a story worth sharing, email me at christianharris@seatown.com. That's sea-town.com. I would also be honored if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a nice 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on great guests and provide exceptional content, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rank well on iTunes so others can find and enjoy the show as well. You can also find out more about me, how my real estate indie brokerage and our unconventional approach can help you with your Seattle and Eastside real estate needs, and other projects I'm working on by visiting seatown.com. That's sea-town.com. Thanks for listening. Today's intro and outro music is courtesy of the Fascination Movement. You can find their albums in the iTunes Store. The Seatown podcast creator and host is Christian Harris. You can listen to more episodes and find all our show notes on our website at seatownpodcast.com. That's sea-townpodcast.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you in a week for our next episode. This has been a Seatown Media production.